Good morning, all the English-speaking world. My name is Ecrlinf-Linnik. I am Russian philologist of Jewish and Ukrainian origin, and now I want to appeal to all the Western political establishment, and I want to advise them how to prevent a new world war, how to avoid a new world war, and how to conserve, how to retain their influence over the world. Firstly, dear Western political establishment, if you want to prevent a new world war, if you want to avoid a new world war, and if you want to retain your influence on the world, you must completely change your behavior. You must stop your aggressive promotion of the Western political system, and instead of this, you must promote Western culture, Western classical culture, Western classical literature, Western classical philosophy, and especially Western humanism, because this is the best thing which Western civilization gave to the world. This is the best thing given by the Western civilization to the world. Western classical culture, Western classical literature, especially Western classical philosophy, especially the philosophy of humanism, especially the humanistic idea of absolute value of every human being life. This is the first question. That's the second question. You Western political establishment, you must know, you must not try to retain your political power over the world, but you must conserve and you must develop the spiritual influence, intellectual influence of all the Westernly educated people around all the world. There are 2 points of my speech. I return to the first point. So you must not promote, especially aggressively promote Western political system, Western so-called Western liberal democracy, because liberal democracy is only is one of many possible forms of democracy, and democracy is one of many possible forms of organization of society, of organization of state. You must not promote some form, you must promote the content, and the content of all the Western philosophy is humanism, especially humanistic idea of the absolute value of every human being life. So you must not promote liberalism or democracy, you must promote humanism, and possibly in the future transhumanism. Now I explain what I mean by transhumanism. Now I explain my understanding of transhumanism, my conception of transhumanism. If the principal idea of humanism is the idea of absolute value of every human being life, that's why the principal idea of transhumanism must be the idea of absolute value of all the forms of life, natural life as well as artificial life, the life of all the animals and the life of all the robots. That's why we must, firstly, we must program the humanistic idea, all the humanistic ideas in the artificial brains of all the robots, and at the same time, we must stop killing the animals. We must stop using the animals as a food. We must not kill the animals. We must not use the animals as a food. We must invent, we must elaborate some artificial food, for example, by cloning animals' organs, by cloning animals' tissues, by cloning animals' flesh. And we must cultivate animals' meat, as well as now we cultivate the corn, the potatoes, the apples, all the agriculture. And I think the predestination of all the humankind is to create some new nature, is to create some new biosphere, possibly not on this planet, not on the Earth, but on some other planets. to create some new nature, to create some new biosphere without killings and without deaths, to create some new biosphere, to create some new nature in which all the forms of life will not kill each other, will not use each other as a food, because the food will be artificial. I think this is predestination of humankind. I think this is our possible future, if we will prevent a new world war. And in order to prevent this new world war, we must return to classical humanism. We must, especially you, Western political establishment, you must temporarily forget your liberalism, forget your democracy, and return to classical humanism. Because I repeat that liberalism and democracy are only possible political applications of humanism. Liberal democracy is one of many possible political applications of humanism, but not necessary political application of humanism. Now I explain what I mean. Now I explain why I think that liberal democracy is not necessary political application of humanism. Now I explain this. Three historical examples. Three historical examples. First example, let's compare two great countries of Europe of 18th century, England and Russia, British Empire and Russian Empire. In England, in 18th century, there was a developed democracy. There was parliament, there was several political parties, free elections, independent judgment system, independent courts, and so on. And at the same time, in Russia of 18th century, there was absolute monarchy without any hint to democracy. Absolute monarchy, absolute dictatorship of noblemen, dictatorship of aristocracy. By the way, one of father's foundators of communism, Friedrich Engels, called Alexander Suvorov, the great Russian military chief. Engels called them naked sword of the dictatorship of noblemen, naked sword of the dictatorship of aristocracy. So in Russia of 18th century, there was dictatorship of aristocracy, dictatorship of noblemen, and absolute monarchy, with any hint to democracy. Also, England of 18th century was more liberal, not also far more democratic state than Russia, but also more liberal state than Russia. For example, in England of 18th century, you could openly express your non-religious opinions, your non-religious views, or even your anti-religious opinions. In Russia of 18th century, you could not openly express your non-religious opinions. Although in Russia there was some non-believers among noblemen, among aristocracy. Of course, in Russia of that time there were non-believers, but they could not openly express their opinions or openly express their views. So England of 18th century was a far more democratic state and far more liberal state than Russia. But at the same time, in England of that time, in England of 18th century, the death penalty, the capital punishment was so frequent. The death penalties, the capital punishments were so frequent events that the hanged bodies, the gibbets, are the necessary elements of all the English landscapes. as well as now the wind power station, the wind electricity station. And at the same time, in Russia of 18th century, the death penalty was some exceptional, was some extraordinary event, was very seldom, very rare event. And Empress Elizabeth, the daughter of Peter the Great, abolished death penalty during all her ruling, during all her time, and she ruled over Russia during more than 20 years. During all her ruling, there was no death penalty, because when she came to power, she promised to the God to abolish death penalty. She came to power through some little military revolution in St. Petersburg, although she was a legal daughter of Peter the Great. She had all the rights to be the Empress of Russia, but the situation was complicated, and to come to power, she came to power with the help of some little military revolution in St. Petersburg. And at the night when her supporters were making this little military revolution in St. Petersburg, at this night, Princess Elizabeth was praying in her palace, and she promised to the God to abolish death penalty in Russia, and she fulfilled her promise. The death penalty during all her ruling, during all the time when she ruled over Russia, there was no death penalty in Russia. And after that, during the ruling of the Empress Catherine the Great, the death penalty was very seldom event, was some exceptional, was some extraordinary event in Russia of the 18th century. This is the first example illustrating my declaration that democracy and humanism are different things, and democracy, liberal democracy, is only not necessary, non-necessary application of humanism. This is the first historical example. The second historical example, 20th century. Let's compare two Wikipedia articles, Stalin's repressions and Vietnam War. And please, let's compare the number of victims of both historical events, Stalin's repressions and Vietnam War. What I want to say, I am not an admirer of Mr. Stalin, of Comrade Stalin. And I am not a hater of the President Lyndon Johnson, of the President Kennedy, of the President Nixon, of all the presidents and vice presidents of the United States during the Vietnam War. What I want to say that in 20th century, all the great countries violated the basic principles of humanism. All the great countries, democratic as well as not democratic. And because the 20th century is the 20th century is the century of the global crisis of humanism. Global crisis of humanism. All the countries, especially great countries, violated the basic principles of humanism. This is the second example, second historical example of my declaration that democracy, liberal democracy, is not necessary political application of humanism, that liberal democracy cannot save the society, cannot save the state from some unhuman acts, from some anti-humanistic acts, from some atrocities. Liberal democracy could not prevent some atrocities, some unhuman acts, some anti-humanistic acts. The third historical example. Now, recently, several weeks ago, the great Western philosopher, Noam Chomsky, Mr. Noam Chomsky, expressed his opinion that Russia acts in Ukraine more humanly than America in Iraq. The Russian war in Ukraine is more humanistic war than American war in Iraq. This is the opinion of the great modern philosopher Noam Chomsky. So this is the three historical examples illustrating my thesis, illustrating my declaration that liberal democracies non-necessary political application of humanism. That liberal democracy is only one of many possible forms of democracy, and democracy is one of many possible forms of organization of society, organization of state. So we must not promote some form, we must promote the content, and the content of all the Western philosophy. The best thing given by the Western civilization to the world is humanism, is humanistic idea of every of absolute value of every human being life. This is the idea which we must promote. And the second question, if you Western political establishment, if you want to conserve, to retain your influence around all the world, you must not try to retain your political power, to retain political power of some Western countries. This is a mistake. You must conserve and you must develop spiritual influence, intellectual influence of all the Westernly educated people around all the world. Because now in 21st century, political power is not so important than intellectual influence, cultural influence, spiritual influence. Cultural influence is far more important than political power. So you Western, if you want to prevent the New World War, and if you want to conserve, if you want to retain your influence over the world, your influence on the world, you must not try to retain your political power. You must conserve and you must develop spiritual influence of all the Westernly educated people, including Russian people and Chinese people, because Russian people and Chinese people are also Westernly educated people. For example, Chinese people are Westernly educated people, but they prefer the left wing of the Western philosophy. They prefer the left domain of the great Western philosophical culture. They prefer the left part of the great Western philosophical world. They prefer communism, they prefer socialism. The national idea of modern China is officially communism, but really very moderate socialism. Modern China is officially communist country, but really a very moderate socialist country. This is China. And what about Russia? What about, if you want to know what does mean Russian national idea, you must read Dostoevsky's Pushkin speech. Dostoevsky's speech about Pushkin, the complete English translation of this text, you can find in Wikisource. Dostoevsky's speech about Pushkin. I want to make some remark about Dostoevsky, that because this great writer has some reputation of anti-Semitic writer, of anti-Semitic author, anti-Semitic thinker, but this is mistake. This is mistake. all the so-called anti-Semitism of Dostoevsky is not really anti-Semitism, but this is criticism towards Jewish nationalism. There are different things: anti-Semitism and criticism of Jewish nationalism. And Dostoevsky criticized Jewish nationalism from the left point of view, because Dostoevsky was rather leftist, rather left philosopher, as well as, for example, as well as Lev Tolstoy. Dostoevsky was almost socialist philosopher, and even some Russian Orthodox fundamentalists accused Dostoevsky that in his novel Brothers Karamazov, the principal ideologist of this novel, the principal ideologist of this novel, the monk Zosima, the father Zosima, expresses not Christian ideas but socialist ideas. So some Russian literary critics, some Russian Orthodox literary critics accused Dostoevsky that his Christianity is not Christianity but socialism. So Dostoevsky was really rather left, was almost socialist thinker, and he criticized Jewish nationalism from the left point of view. So it's my little remark about Dostoevsky. So if you want to understand what does mean Russian national idea, you must read Dostoevsky's Pushkin speech about Pushkin. And another remark, please note that Russia was always was Western countries. Russia always was a part of European Christian civilization. And for example, after when Prince Vladimir baptized early medieval Russia, the Russia of 10th century, when he declared Christianity as official religion of Russia, he abolished the death penalty. Yes, I said that Empress Elizabeth in 18th century abolished the death penalty, but 8 centuries before it, Prince Vladimir, who came to Kiev from Novgorod, because at that time Novgorod was a more powerful center of Russia than Kiev, and Novgorod dictated to Kiev which prince would rule over the Russia. So Prince Vladimir, who came to Kiev from Novgorod, he abolished death penalty immediately after baptism, immediately after declaration of Christianity as official religion of Russia. But how long? It's unclear how long existed this abolishment. Possibly not very long. During not very long time, this abolishment was valuable. But the fact is that Prince Vladimir understood the principal humanistic idea of Christianity, the idea of absolute value of every human being life. So this is one of many historical examples, one of many historical facts which prove that Russia always was a part of Western humanistic civilization, Western Christian civilization. So I repeat that humanism is the best side of the Western civilization. Humanistic idea of absolute value of every human being life is the best side, and you, Western political establishment, if you want to prevent a new world war, and if you want to retain your influence on the world, you must not promote some Western political systems, but you must promote the best things that Western civilization gave to the world. You must promote Western humanism, Western humanistic idea of the absolute value of every human being life, which expressed in all the Western classical culture, all the Western classical philosophy, all the Western classical literature. For example, Italian opera. Let's promote Italian opera instead of American democracy, because the vast majority of Italian operas are based on the greatest masterpieces of the classical European literature, and all the classical European literature is humanistic literature. The humanistic idea of absolute value of every human being life is the central idea of all the European classical literature. So now, in order to prevent a new world war, and in order to conserving the influence of the Western civilization around all the world, you, Western establishment, you must temporarily forget your liberalism, forget your democracy, and you must promote humanism. You must return to the classical humanism, to the classical humanistic philosophy. You must promote this idea instead of idea of liberal democracy. And also, you must not try to retain political power of some Western countries around, over the world. This is a mistake. If you want to prevent, if you want to avoid new world war, and if you want to conserve your influence on the world, you must conserve and develop the spiritual influence of all the Westernly educated people around all the world, including Russian people and Chinese people. So this is my principal thought. This is the end of my speech. Thank you for your attention.